I'm going to be talking us through, as you said, building a good foundation of future. So this will be looking at going from quite a small system with a client I'm working with, only had kind of one team working on Jira about a year ago, to kind of expanding that out to the wider business. Kind of before we go into that too much detail on that, though, just a little bit of background about me. So again, my name's James. I work for a company called FCM Group, who work in kind of technical testing, implementation, development, that kind of thing. So I'm a business analyst who works there, and I'm working with a client in the financial sector, the public sector, who's recently, about a year or so ago, started using Jira, and I wanted to kind of look at expanding that. So as a kind of introduction suggests, Jira has loads of flexibility that you can use on the system, whether it's workflows, custom fields, any type of configuration. So where do we actually draw the line of how much is to customization and how much is just enough to kind of keep that performance, keep that standardization, that kind of thing. So kind of some of the things I wanted to walk through is kind of how we chose to tackle this scalability issue with Jira, give you a bit of insight of kind of the steps that we went through, the logic that we went through of our goals and how we approached it. And I think the key thing maybe to bear in mind of this isn't per se the only way to do it. Hopefully this gives you an idea of how we chose to do it, and you can kind of take away what you think was good and bad from our approach, and open to any kind of questions or feedback on your thoughts as well when we get a little bit further on. So just to go through a quick kind of agenda. I'll go through kind of a quick intro of where the high level kind of business situation was a year ago in February last year, kind of where they wanted to go with it and what their kind of high level goals were of creating something that was standardized for the business and scaling for the business, and how we chose to approach it, how we actually got there via an implementation, because of the kind of the stages, the iterative process we went through, and we're going to show a bit of an example of what our service desk template looks like, specifically for service management, and what type of things we've kept standardized and what we've kept as flexible. And then we're going to a little bit of kind of what we see as the benefits, lessons learned of what we've done and what we'd look at doing the next steps. And then if anyone does have any questions, I'll leave a little bit of time for questions towards the end, but we've also got a panel session at the end of the event as well. So just to go into a bit of a summary and a background then of where the business was a year ago. So this was in February last year. They had Jira, they had it as an on-premise resource, they had Jira Data Center, and they used both Jira Service Management and Jira Software for the software development and the service side of the business. They also use Confluence knowledge base, just as a bit of a background, but not too important for this kind of talk through. And they had various apps that they use as well, so things like Jetty, the calendar app for Jira, but mainly the one that we'll refer to in this session is Script Runner, which is something we use as part of our standardization. In terms of user base, it was mainly our IT department and a little bit of our project team that used it. So people who were quite IT literate, they've been using it for a little while, they knew what they were doing in the way around their IT, but that was kind of the only people who used it. Anyone who was kind of new to Jira or wasn't really IT literate never really used the system. So it's something we had to bear in mind, that a lot of the teams which were kind of expressing interest in some kind of tool to manage their workload would never have used the system before. So we needed something to kind of expand that out to them. So the reason we kind of wanted to kind of go from where we were then to where we are now, of having a template and a standardized system for the business, is the client wanted to make Jira their primary IT solution for any kind of workload management. So moving away from things like Excel documents, so keeping things on paper, anything in kind of a Microsoft Teams board. They wanted to move away from that and have more of a streamlined system. And again, moving away from any of the applications they have in circulation, which those extra costs, extra resources they didn't really want. So they wanted to bring all that together. So that's kind of where they wanted to go. So there was really, when I come on board in February last year, there was three things that we kind of needed to tackle. How do we actually make this scalable from where you are to kind of expanding it out to the business? When it is scalable, how do we get these new teams on board? How do we kind of sell it to them? Do we pitch it to them? And how do we ensure it's maintainable? Kind of as Rodney and Peter suggested, it's really easy, as I've found over the last year, that these small changes add up until it's unmaintainable and no one really knows what's going on. So that was quite a key thing that we wanted to kind of avoid. So starting at the beginning, our kind of high levels and goals. So there was four main things that we wanted to look at. The main one being standardization and administration for easy management of the system. So at the time, there was only one resource which managed Jira, and it was a pretty much, we want to make a change, we'll do it now. And that was the end of the story. There was no real governance or standardization around that. So that was something we needed to address. We needed to kind of stop that and put some kind of, some layer of there, making it standardized and administered rather than just making any changes that we wanted to do. Configuration applicable for all levels of experience. So again, this was looking at the experienced IT users which were already on the system. How do we make it applicable and usable for them? And likewise, new teams that have expressed interest and we want to bring onto the system, how do we make it appealing to them? How do we make it easy for them to pick up? Because we don't want to make it an overhead. We want to make it a benefit when they actually come on board. Thirdly, some kind of formal level of governance. So again, when we've actually got this in place, that's great. We've got a standardized procedure, but how do we keep that in place and stop it kind of from deviating from that? So we need some kind of governance in there to kind of keep the template or the standardization in place. And then lastly, kind of as both Peter and Rodney said, performance was paramount, particularly the customer services teams we were looking to bring on board. With such critical teams using the system, we needed it to be foolproof without any kind of outage happening. So these were our goals that we were looking to do, which I'd imagine to most people are kind of fairly standard goals that you want to achieve with any kind of project. But in terms of how we actually approach them, we kind of looked at 3 pillars that we wanted to look at and achieve. So we wanted to keep the cost as low as we could, as always. We wanted to keep the time input from any kind of resources within reason, so not having too many dedicated resources to this particular application or to any issues coming from the application. And most importantly, which was the whole incentive for the project, is to make it scalable for the whole business. And the way we decided to do that was by creating a blueprint offering. So what this would mean for both projects, the software, and for service desk and the service management, we would have a set template of this is what you get, this is so much you can customize and so much that is kind of standard, you can't change. The idea being that the bit which is standardized makes it easy to maintain, and the bits which are customizable allow it to be flexible to both sides of the business, so those who are beginner kind of level into Jira and those which are experienced, without having too much overhead. Before we go into that, though, just to kind of very quickly go over 3 other options that we considered, just to give you an idea. So we did look at something just out of the box infrastructure, as we called it. So essentially, we would allow no customization. It would just be, this is a set locked template. You can't change anything. Here you are. And as you can imagine, that really isn't scalable. Great for costs, great for time, because it's not really much input to go into there. But it's one size definitely isn't going to fit all in any business. So that really wasn't an option. The second option we looked at was looking at an internal service desk for managing features. So having a little bit of governance or kind of a process in place of when someone requests a change, it gets reviewed before it gets put in place, but there wouldn't be anything that was just standardized. Everything was effectively flexible. We would just have this quality gate in place, which again is a little bit closer to where we wanted to be, but it doesn't really resolve that case of scalability and being approachable for beginner and advanced levels. So although it was closer to what we wanted to achieve, we deemed it not really appropriate for where we were going. And then lastly, was just a freely scaling infrastructure to effectively do nothing, allow it to continue as is, which, as you can imagine, would have led to performance issues. No one would have known what was going on in the system because of all the changes that may have taken place. So it was deemed not really appropriate. So this kind of template or this blueprint was where we kind of landed ourselves. So now we've got the blueprint that we know we want to go with, how do we actually get there? Yeah, we've got an idea, but where do we go? And anyone who's kind of familiar with an iterative approach might be very familiar with the kind of process we went through. Effectively, we went through 3 key stages: a proof of concept, so kind of planning, well, what do we want it to look like? What does the user base look like? Actually creating a template, which we went through various iterations of, and then running some pilot studies. So effectively what this would look like is the proof of concept would be looking at the teams that we're going to bring onto Jira as a collective, what's different between them, what's similar, where can we merge similarities to keep it standardized, and then actually putting that into a template and seeing what that looked like and how it might play out. And in the early days, we just did what we called soft pilot launches, where we didn't actually onboard anyone. We just kind of said, well, if we were going to put you onto this template, would it work? Would it fit? Does it fit for multiple teams? And as we kind of went through a number of cycles, we got to a point where we did some live pilots where we put a number of teams onto Jira, and they all went quite well, and we learned an awful lot by actually onboarding them. So after going through a number of cycles, we eventually got to one which was signed off, tested, and accepted by the stakeholders, and that became part of our kind of pitching package when we went into BAU. So the template acts pretty much as a pitch for the teams of, this is what you will get, this is what you can customize, this is what you can't customize. And we found it really did help from a project manager and a business analyst perspective of when you're looking at the scope of what is in and out of scope for an onboarding project, you know from the get-go what you can change and what you can't. In addition to this, we also kind of make it a bit more friendly to the beginner or beginner entry level types of users. We had like a training repository, which consisted of a number of training videos and sort of aid memoirs, which the guys at Automation Consultants put together for us, which we've had a massive pickup of. Actually, when they've never seen the system before or never even heard of it, it really helped them get a bit of confidence on using the system straight away. So that's something we found quite beneficial as we go through this process. So this went over the course of between kind of 3 or 4 months. And when we got to the end of the go live in BAU, this is where we ended up. So this is a snapshot of our service desk template. So this kind of shows, hopefully we'll walk through it, this kind of shows you what we offer to the business when they want a customer facing service desk, and what they can or can't customize. So it's pretty standard, there's nothing kind of weird and wonderful on there, but the main objective, we wanted to keep it on one workflow. So all teams, all service desks will sit on this one workflow, and there's a few things around this that we can customize. So the things which were standardized were the actual workflow itself, its statuses and its transition screens. So all of them would remain the same, so they could all sit on the same workflow. And we have a bit of automation on here to help the teams work together who aren't too familiar with Jira, between our in progress and with supplier route, which with Script Runner, we built a bit of software which effectively allows a ticket to be cloned and moved to a different project. So they can effectively pass tickets between each other without having to come out of Jira and without too much technical knowledge on how to take that and move it between teams. And that one in particular has proven quite useful for 3 of our customer services teams to pass tickets between each other at the moment. On the flip side of that, for things that are changeable, so what we call the standard screens, so that will be our view, create and edit screens on Jira, and they can effectively have whatever they want on there, and that ties in with the second point for custom fields. Generally speaking, we let them have any custom fields they want on there, as long as they're either not a duplicate and they don't go on the transition screens. So it gives that little bit of flexibility of any type of specific MI teams might want to record. If they've got any specific fields that they personally need to record, it gives us that bit of flexibility to let them do that. Portals and issue types, we also let them customize themselves. So that kind of, we see that sitting a level above the workflow and kind of rides along with it. So particularly the portal, which kind of sits outside of it, so they're allowed to customize them. Behaviors is a little bit of a tricky one. Generally, we don't tend to pitch the behaviors to try and keep everything as simple as we possibly can. But on a case-by-case basis, if they want something a bit weird and wonderful, we do allow them to set behaviors on certain fields or certain things that happen within Jira. The main thing that we found recently on the teams we have onboarded is the main behavior is if a certain field is selected, I want a certain field to either show or not show. So the good thing at the moment is that bit of functionality is well known to our IT service desk guys, and it's pretty standard across the business. That tends to be the type of behaviors they're looking for. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea. I won't go over the project software side of things. I think that might be a bit too much to go over in this session. But hopefully this gives you an idea of the type of package that we pre-offer all of our internal customers. So that's what we get, that's what we provide, that's our kind of pitch to the business. And we have found that it's been picked up quite well for them. So just to go through a few business benefits, we have found quite a good adoption for all user levels, from our IT service desk team to our customer services team, who were using a different application for ticket management before Jira. They've all picked it up well. They all know kind of the same terminology of when it goes through a workflow, which always helps between cross-team operations when they want to work together. And likewise, when they want to pass tickets between each other, it's nice and easy for them to pass it and track it all within the same system without taking anything outside, either into Excel, emails, or any other system like that. Sharing of learning. So with any template features being global, if someone's got an idea of, oh, wouldn't it be good to have this feature or this field to be added in to this certain transition, it's something that we have to vet with the rest of the business, or the rest of the business which is using the system. So any ideas, particularly good ideas of using the system in a certain way, it allows everyone to work together and use that idea. With the third point, it kind of ties in a very similar way of changing the templates. Because everyone has to change, it filters out those small, if you like, unnecessary changes that the system doesn't really need. So it deters the users from making those small changes that could potentially massively expand the system unnecessarily, because the rest of the business don't really need it, they don't want it. And in 9 out of 10 cases, we found that actually they don't want it. It's just an idea which maybe they haven't fully thought through. When you walk it through, it's not really needed on the system. And then lastly, standardization. With mainly with that passenger supplier bit of functionality that I mentioned, that's we had quite a big pickup with that of the teams working together. Before they would either kind of just go the times where we could be in the office, walk over to someone's desk, take it into an email, maybe send something on SharePoint. So it was across many different systems and forms of communication. But with everything in one place now, it's nice and easy to track, particularly if someone leaves the business, someone's ill, maybe they're seconded to a different team. Everything's in one place, nothing gets lost through word of mouth or in someone's inbox. So that gives you an idea of some of the things that went really well after we've done this. Moving on to some lessons learned, so things that maybe didn't go so well, that I've kind of picked out three of the main things I found from this project that we did, which might be useful for yourselves, and I particularly find useful moving forwards. So firstly, is finding a balance between enforcing that standardization and customization. We definitely found going through an iterative approach with this was more than beneficial. Looking at our very earlier concepts, I think if we went for more of a straight through or waterfall approach, it definitely wouldn't have been as valuable as our current method is, our current template. So just, if you like, taking a step back when you've got an idea of like, is this the best? Have your peers review it. Our colleagues at AC reviewing it. Is it, do we think it's the best practice? What do other people think outside of the business? Going through those iterations really, I think, really got us to where we are today, with something that's quite valuable for our business. In coalition with that, if you like, sometimes too much option can actually slow it down, so setting a deadline for these changes. As I said, I think this project took us about 3 to 4 months to deploy, and that probably could have been quicker if we put a line in the sand sooner, because for quite a while we did kind of revolve around making small, slight tweaks to a single template, which in some ways is great, but in others, well, we want to deliver something of value and not kind of go around with the proof of concept for too long. So having that deadline was definitely beneficial, and we did kind of realise what we were doing. Well, actually, we're going to do something by this date, and this will be the marked product that we're going to deliver. And then lastly, again, something which could have sped things up from my perspective was delivering it as a focus project or a priority project. When we started this last year, it was more of a backbench project. So it's like we need to do it, but it's not really a focus, it's not really a priority. There wasn't that much resource or focus put on it. In hindsight, it has turned out to be really important for the business. So if we looked at it in a bit more detail then, got some more stakeholder buy-in and kind of eyes on the project as something was as valuable, it probably could have moved it a bit forward a bit faster. Again, this is just something I found, but it very much depends how important standardizing something like this would be for your business. Preparing for the future, so by all means we're in a good place now, but we're definitely not finished. It's definitely not perfect. So a few small takeaways of what we're looking to do next. Administration and maintenance of custom fields. So we definitely use too many custom fields on the system. One particular one, which kind of niggles me every day, is our department field. I think we have 4 or 5 different department fields with slight different variations, which makes some reporting and that passing between existing service desks and our new ones in the template a little bit difficult. So that is something which ideally we'd like to kind of clean up and maintain. Request changes. We have something for the governance side of things. We have something called a non-standard request process. So anything which is out of the box, new, different to what you've already got, goes through some set governance, which is something quite new we've introduced, and it has definitely helped keep this standardized process, this blueprint, enforced. But again, it's still quite new, it's growing, and it's something which I think we definitely don't need to lose sight on, because otherwise we'll be back at square one. Bespoke training, as I mentioned before, we originally had some pre-packaged training videos and materials for the teams we were onboarding. Recently, we started actually giving them bespoke training with myself and the AC consultant team, and it really has given a much bigger pickup with this, if like the beginner or entry-level teams which have been coming to Jira. So if anything, that's something that I think has been really beneficial to kind of get buy-in from new teams. And then lastly, it's more of a smaller point, a minor point, is the standardization reporting. One of the hardest things I tend to find when you start a new project of onboarding someone is, well, what type of reporting do you want to get out of this at the end? And sometimes it can be a really hard decision because you're asking what the finished goal is before they've even started. So one of the ideas we've been toying around with is maybe having sort of a pre-packaged reporting offering of this is what we can give you out of the box. Anything extra we can definitely look at, but this is kind of what you get to get you started and get the ball rolling.